If we look at another story this past week, which I suppose is kind of on the same theme, really, South African Airways, the national carrier of South Africa, 85 years old, basically a mass strike going on for the past 7 days as we record this podcast. I mean, I actually overheard basically an interview on Bruce Whitfield's Money Show with one of the board members, who's kind of put a rough estimate of a minimum of 52 million rand losses per day. Now, obviously, they can't quantify this more than that in terms of customers who are obviously looking at this strike happening and are holding back on future bookings. But just in terms of the flights that are landed, basically the flights that are grounded, not taking off in the kind of current running of the airline, that's his sort of a minimum estimate. I mean, basically, to put a bit of context on how it's got here. If we look at SAA over the last 10 years, they've had sort of 9 CEOs, a lot of mismanagement, a lot of corruption. In terms of the bailouts from government, if we look at the last 3 years, government has handed them 20 billion rand, and basically are now at a stage where government can't afford to do that anymore. South African government obviously has had a lot of corruption in itself as well, and are now actually holding back those paychecks. So, I mean, what do you make of this? What is it feeling like that side?
Yeah, it looks like a mess. It looks like a mess, and it has looked like a mess for a long time now. Yeah. I think SAA has been one of those state-owned enterprises that has been the brunt of a lot of the cynicism and a lot of the concern about the country. Mostly because, as you say, those economics don't make sense, right? And the fact that these bailouts have to keep coming and coming and coming is not a good sign at all. But also, it's reputational damage for South Africa. Definitely. So your national airline is a big part of reputation, and for a lot of tourists who are coming to the country for the first time, that might be their first experience with your country.
100%.
And if your national airline is under stress and is not operating the way it should, it really paints a bad picture on South Africa and affects tourism and affects all the other spending that you want from foreigners in the rest of the place. Yep. So it's a really dangerous place to get things wrong, right? And so reputationally, it's not good for South Africa. And I'm not quite sure what the solution is. I'm really hoping they find a way to turn it around. But when you read story after story after story after story about how things keep getting worse, I'm not sure where the savior comes from. And
I think to add on that, I think if the strike continues for much longer, I think it is very, very possible that we might see those doors close. Unfortunately, I mean, kind of hearing stats of, so basically the reason for these strikes is obviously wages. Workers are looking for 8%. The current proposal in place is 5.9%. Now, I mean, looking at this, I've seen that South Africa's inflation is at its lowest point in the last 9 years at 3.7%. I mean, is 5.9% a reasonable sort of proposal when your inflation rate is sitting at 3.7? I mean, certainly looking at the past rolls I've had in the UK, increases are generally inflationary if there's no sort of other factors there. You haven't got a new role, new responsibilities, those kinds of things. Is this a reasonable proposal at face value, or do you think there's other things under play here?
Yeah, so it's really hard to answer that question. I don't know what reasonable looks like because, to be honest, I don't think that labor unions are looking at inflation really as a marker. I think they've got some idea in their mind as to what's a fair price for their work, and under whatever working conditions they're working under.
100%. Yeah.
And so it might look somewhat reasonable on the face of it, but I don't have any information to make a comment on that really.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's what I don't like about it is how long it's taking to negotiate.
Yeah.
Right. So I understand you're always going to have negotiation. You're always going to have to come to some sort of compromise. That's how it works. But what I want to see is the negotiations sped up and come to some sort of agreement so that we can move on. And I'm not sure what the right number is. I don't think anyone does.
Sure, no,
it would be easy if they did.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, those are kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, and I think making it a bit tricky as well is kind of a bit of a catch-22, is based on the solvency and liquidity of the business at the moment, the board is really concerned at the moment about reckless trading, as we know that Companies Act legislation that actually has personal implications for directors involved, and pushing that envelope a little bit further on this negotiation, definitely that's a piece of legislation that will need to be considered for this airline.
Yeah, definitely. So we have to watch this space and see what happens. Hopefully they figure it out.
Across the pond with Barry and Chad.